Hello, welcome to California Rebel Base, everyone. This is where the California Revolution starts, where we dive into what's wrong with California and, as Steve likes to put it, how to put it right. I'm Kristen Garcia Dumont, and I'm alone today. So we're going to get into a lot of mischief. We're going to cover a couple news stories, but what I want to do when it's just me, in the vein of causing some trouble, is have a theme. And the theme for today is we're being played. And I think that really sums up a lot of what's going on in California, the nation more broadly, but in particular in California. You're seeing this incredible push to divide the state into haves versus have-nots, to divide the races. It just seems like we can't absorb any news story or hear anything about what's going on in California without having to consider the race implications of something. And there's, really potent example. I want to go through two examples, but a really potent one is what's going on with California math curriculum. And Steve and I have talked about this on some past episodes that you guys can check out. But for those who didn't listen to that episode, California is revising its math standards. And some of you who are very caught up in the news might say, Kristen, come on. Yesterday, they voted to not adopt this very specific curriculum. It was defeated. And what I want to say to you guys is, again, the theme, we're all being played. It doesn't matter that the specific curriculum proposed by the California Department of Education was voted down. The point is that this is what these people believe, and people need to get educated about what the people in charge of our children's educations believe about the state of race in the country and in California, because it impacts you and it impacts your children. And so it's going to impact our state as these people become the future founders and the future workers of America. So let's talk about this a little bit. So for those who are following it, California has proposed a new math framework. It's called a pathway to equitable math instruction. And that word equitable should immediately make everybody very concerned. When you hear that word, that should be a trigger word for you, that you as a California resident need to do some research, because there's some public policy issues for sure. There's definitely dark money involved. There's political interests, and it is not in the best interest of your children, most likely. So equitable is a pretty key word to trigger in on. So what they want to do is that for our 6.1 million K through 12 public school students, we want to have this curriculum, which we're going to have some form of it. We're not going to have this curriculum. This specific one failed, but we're going to have some versions of this. And the whole background of it is that it's going to counter the cultural forces that have led to and continue to perpetuate the current inequities. Okay. And I want to read you, for those of you who didn't look at it, you actually should. It's equitablemath.org or equitablemath.com. And one of the things I actually want you to notice is when you try to go to the website, you'll see that it's actually a redirect from Gavin Newsom's website, which actually I think is very interesting. So this is something I think the governor is behind, the governor agrees with, and obviously our state board of education is very invested in this. So some of this, you really need to take a minute and look at it. And I'm going to read a couple things that I think are particularly outrageous. So the framework for deconstructing racism in mathematics offers essential characteristics of anti-racist math educators and critical approaches to dismantling white supremacy in math classrooms by making visible the toxic characteristics of white supremacy culture. And I read that to you, and I want you to absorb it for a second, because it doesn't matter that the specific curriculum outlined in this, I think it's a 5-point plan, was voted down. The point is that this is the fundamental premise of what these people who are in charge of our children's education believe. They believe that there's fundamental white supremacy in our society, and that math is somehow this perfect example of that white supremacy. How's that possible? If there's one thing that should be sort of untouched and left alone from this toxic discussion of racism, it should be something that's so fact-based and so objective like math. We want to leave that untouched. Without math and people who are great at math and believing that math should be precise, Our bridges would fall, planes would fall from the sky. We'd have a lot of quite engineering problems in our society. So we need to leave math alone. And the fact that we're not leaving math alone should really trigger everybody to think about, why is that? Why are we taking on math? Why are we taking on something so objective? This just doesn't make any sense, right? Why are we pitting parents against each other and people feeling like, look, if you support the current math curriculum, which allows your child to be in advanced math, that somehow you're a racist. You're perpetuating racism, right? So it's trying to turn people against each other. Why do they want that? And that's what we always need to do when we hear these words and we hear these ridiculous policies is, one, we need to go to the root of who's behind this. Why would they want it? This doesn't make any sense. So what could be the motivation? And then three, really important is, let's not assume somebody else is solving the problem, because they're probably not, right? Okay. So when we look into what the heck is going on and you do a little research and you double click on it, what you find out is that, probably what we already knew, our students are failing, right? We're ranked either last or second to last in most metrics for school performance. We have the lowest rate of high school graduation. We have the highest rate of individuals in the state who are 25 and over who haven't even completed ninth grade math. So by all objective measures, the state is failing. It's failing in math. Okay, it's failing on many vectors, but it's particularly failing in math. Combine that with what we've learned as parents this year. What we've learned as parents this year is that the teachers union has a hell of a lot of power, and they certainly have a heck of a lot of power over Gavin Newsom. Okay. So I started digging. What's going on? There's got to be some angle as to why we're doing this. We're last. Instead of trying to get better, we're actually trying to lower the bar for everybody. What could be the problem? And the first thing I found out was that, our teachers are not doing a great job actually improving math scores and math skills. Number two, it looks like we have teachers who are not passing the basic standards for becoming a teacher at a high enough rate. Okay. And instead of figuring out what that is and why that is and how maybe the underlying education system is to blame, we're just trying to eviscerate the standards. We're trying to lower the standards for teachers. And you guys should look into what are the standards for teachers, because one of the things that I just found out and I found really alarming was that, of course, there is a math requirement. You have to pass certain math tests in order to teach our children, as you should. And in 2019, there was a very big push to get rid of those standards or to lower those standards. And parents rightfully said, absolutely not. I'm not going to stand for this. I want the people who are teaching my child to be proficient in math. And so it failed. What's interesting about this is this push to get rid of the standard would have lowered the standard to such an unacceptable bar that they had to come at it a different way. And I'm now getting convinced, the more I dig into this issue, that this is really about letting teachers' unions off the hook, lowering that bar in a completely different way. We couldn't do it when we tried to go through the front door. So we're going to backdoor into lowering the standards for these teachers in order to teach our children. And we're going to do it all in the name of equity. And nobody's going to notice that we actually accomplished what we wanted to accomplish, which is lower the bar, lower the standards to become a teacher. And everyone will actually applaud us because we'll have done it, but while getting to claim that we're anti-racist or fighting racism. So everybody needs to perk up. Every parent in the state needs to perk up and say, what's going on? Why? And I hope this gives some insights to you, but you got to really do your own research. And I really hope that you also start listening and looking at the curriculum that's being taught to your children. Because as I said in the beginning of the show, but I want to reemphasize, just the fact that this specific curriculum was rejected, don't take the win and don't take your eye off the ball and think this is not going to continue to be an issue. This is going to continue to be an issue, and you're going to find a lot of this language. You're going to find these pernicious beliefs within the curriculum. And parents need to pay attention. They need to listen, and they need to show up to their student council meetings, to the parent council meetings, to all of the board meetings and say, I demand better for my child. And if you aren't going to do it, then I'm going to fight for school choice. Okay. So the second thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about school choice. I don't think a lot of parents understand that they don't have a lot of choice. And in fact, the teachers unions, which tend to be where all of these things and all of these ills reside, are behind this massive fight against charter schools. So you've heard a lot of people say, well, if the public schools, go to hell in a handbasket because the math curriculum is terrible, just pull your kids out of public school, send them to a charter school or send them to a private school. First of all, we know what's going to happen. This is going to lead to huge racial inequity as people who can afford to send their kids to private school do. And charter schools will continue to get weaker, right? Why are they going to continue to get weaker? Because they're not unionized for the most part. So the unions don't control charter schools, so they want to get rid of charter schools. And what you as a parent need to interpret that as is what they want to do is they want to get rid of your choice and your ability to educate your child in the way that you want to educate your child. And who's behind all this and who supports this every single time is Gavin Newsom. Okay. So I want everybody to sort of think about all of this stuff and all this madness in the lens of, what do I do to effectuate some change? Right. And the first thing we can do is we can actually recall this governor. We need to get rid of Gavin Newsom and we need to demand some accountability on behalf of Gavin Newsom for these failed policies again and again and again. I'm worried that people see this win yesterday as, okay, I no longer need to worry about what's going on in education curriculum. You need to see the deeper issues here, and you need to see the fact that Gavin Newsom actually supports this. He promotes this and he empowers these people because he must. They are massive political donors for him. So he must listen to them and he must do their bidding. Okay. And the next chapter of We're Being Played, I want to move from schools to COVID. So everybody's been devastated, obviously, by COVID. They're very interrelated issues because COVID really brought out I think the evil that is teachers' unions. And let me say again, I've said this before, but I'll say it again because it bears repeating. This isn't anti-teacher. I think, people who go into teaching, really do such a beautiful, of course, service to our state and to our country. I have a lot of thoughts that we can talk about on a later podcast about whether or not we're truly encouraging the best and brightest to go into teaching. But that's a complicated issue dealing with pensions and so on. So when I criticize teachers' unions, I try to be very precise that what I'm criticizing is the unions. I'm not criticizing the teachers. I'm criticizing the unions. And COVID really brought out the power of the teachers' unions, which essentially is I call it dark money on purpose, because there's just not enough transparency about where that money is going, to whom, and what they're asking for in exchange for their political contributions. We know what they got back. They got back closed schools, which hurt minority children. And they're obviously, I think, 100% behind this fight to lower the standards for math for our students, which is absolutely wrong. But COVID brings up a lot of other issues and a lot of equity issues as well. So in the vein of We're Being Played, Chapter 2, I don't think that people appreciate how hard the lockdowns, not COVID, the lockdowns, so the response to COVID-19 impacted minority communities. I don't see it discussed on the news often enough. When I see it mentioned, it's almost like a head scratching. Gosh, minorities suffer from COVID-19 at much higher rates, as if it's something that's race or ethnicity based, which is totally ludicrous. I think it's pretty obvious what's going on. And we need to be very precise about what our governor has done when he has implemented these draconian lockdowns. As everybody knows, because we feel it every day, we are probably the most locked down state. We continue to be one of the most locked down states. And apparently COVID's going to go away magically on June 15th because the unions said so. Everybody should notice that's exactly why it's June 15th. Why is the state opening up on June 15th? School's closed. So there's no pressure on the teachers unions to get their teachers back to work. And that's 100% the theory behind that date, or the motivation behind that date. And so we need to take a step back and say, again, we're politicizing a disease that is terrible, that was terrifying. And we implemented a bunch of policies in the name of equity or in the name of safety that were completely misguided and ignored a lot of the fundamental issues in our state. So if we look at what happened to the Latino population, we could talk about on another show, the African-American population. But if you look at what happened to the Latino population, let me give you a few stats to kind of set the background. In California, Latinos make up 39.1% of the population. Whites make up 37.5%, Asians 14.4%, Black 5.3%, and Native Americans just shy of 2%. Okay. But California Latinos have a COVID case rate of more than 3 times that of whites and have a strikingly worse COVID-19 outcome as well. The estimated death rate for Latinos is 1.5 higher than white residents. That's 59.2 thousand deaths. 59.2 deaths per 100,000 versus 38.3 deaths per 100,000. Okay. So it begs the question. This has nothing to do with race or ethnicity. There's nothing inherent in the Latino population, ethnic or genetic makeup that would explain such a drastic difference in not just death rate, but in case rate. So what's going on? And what everybody wants you to look at is they want you to look at race, because everything's supposed to be looked at through the lens of race, and this is how we're being played. But what we need to be looking at is we need to be looking at socioeconomic status. Okay? Who were the essential workers that had to go out and continue to work while the elite class or the ruling class got to sit and Zoom from home and continue to work and to continue to get paid? It was Latinos. Who cleans the Walmart at night so that you can go to a very clean and organized Walmart in the morning and get your essentials? It's Latinos. So Latinos make up a disproportionate amount of the people who were essential workers. And Latinos, statistically speaking, live in much smaller houses than their white counterparts. And we know that crowded housing and being in an indoor space contributes very much to COVID spread and to COVID outcomes. Yet we looked completely the other way. And then we also didn't consider what goes on with the Latino population and health. There's an extraordinary amount of the Latino population that has no health care at all, right? So we obviously have a very large illegal immigrant population in the state of California. And those people have no health care. They have emergency care, which is very different, but they don't have health care in any way, shape, or form. And for those Latinos who are here legally and do have health care, they're on Medi-Cal, which is a very known, terrible healthcare program. And no shock, people on Medi-Cal have worse health outcomes than people who are on different insurance programs. And nobody ever looked at the policies of Gavin Newsom and said, wait a minute, these are having a disparate, disproportionate, and horrible and deadly impact on low-income minority communities in our state, and we need to stop. Instead, they twisted us all up that somehow we should be scared of each other. We should be worried about who's vaccinated, who's not, who's following protocols and who's not. They pitted neighbor against neighbor. They created all this massive division to gloss over the fact that their lockdown policies have this terribly racist effect. And one thing that's actually really interesting about California that other people don't know as well is that in California, it's actually illegal to have a facially neutral policy that has a disproportionately negative impact on one race or another. So these policies are not just wrong, they're racist and they're illegal. And what I'm tired of as a citizen, and part of why I wanted to do this podcast, is who's going to be held to account when there are no consequences for these disastrous decisions? Why change? Why change? Nothing changes. If you look through the policies for the past, let's just take the past 3 years in California. They've been disastrous, and they've been disastrous for minorities. It doesn't just stop with COVID. So COVID is this very dramatic and horrible example of how a facially neutral policy, I put with an eye roll, has such a disproportionate impact on minorities and is totally racist and illegal. You go down the list of issues that California has, and every single time you find that the people who bear the burden of that failed policy are Latinos and Blacks. If you take homelessness, which Steve and I will talk about a lot on this podcast in multiple episodes because it's extremely important, the majority of homeless in California are Black. Almost 40% of our homeless population is Black. Almost 30% of the population is Latino. So minorities are disproportionately homeless in our state, and we do absolutely nothing. You have Gavin running around saying he's going to spend another $20 billion on homelessness, and nobody's asking him, where'd the last 15 go? You spent $15 billion in the last 3 years on homelessness. And what did you do? It's worse than ever. There's nobody that you would talk to in San Francisco, San Jose, or Los Angeles, our major counties, that would say that we've done anything to even make a dent on the homeless problem. It's gotten worse. Mental issues are on the rise. Drug abuse is rampant. We have open air drug markets. And these people have no affordable housing, nowhere to go, and they're totally addicted and using drugs in the middle of the street. And as we talked about in one of the episodes as well, they're now stealing up to $9.50 a day so that they can fuel their drug habit. This is cruel. This is horrible. And we're treating the minorities in our state absolutely terribly while he stands up there, he being Gavin, while he stands up there acting like he's the shining light for diversity, hope, and beautiful policies. His policies are disastrous for minorities. And I don't understand why the Latino population and African Americans are not saying enough with killing our people. You can say whatever you want to say with your slicked back hair. You can do your press release yesterday. That was a joke. I want to do a tangent on that for a second. That was so horrible, what happened yesterday in San Jose. And the fact that Gavin Newsom showed up and used it as a moment to lecture about gun control, when we already have some of the toughest gun laws in the country, he used that moment for political gain. That is outrageous. That is absolutely shameful. Citizens need to stand up and say, let's look at the real problems, Gavin. What we really should be pissed about, what you should say is, what the hell is wrong with people? Is you should say that when we look at what we've done to our minority populations. We're killing them with our lockdowns. We're destroying their communities with school choice or the lack thereof, with your lack of homeless policies that work or do anything to improve affordable housing. You hurt minority communities the most. Even wildfire and drought policies. There's actually not a policy I can think of that doesn't disproportionately negatively impact minority communities. It's agricultural communities that are hurt the hardest by the drought. Those are largely minority populations. Our farm workers are minority populations. The last drought, people went without water for days. And have we done anything to mitigate that? Nothing. We throw money at problems with zero accountability. And what's he doing now? He wants to convince all of you to not recall him by giving you, what, is it a $600 check? Is a $600 check worth it to you when your family has no chance of making a better life here in California? I just looked at yesterday, the median cost of a house in California is more than $800,000. Who can afford that? We need to get the state back to a place where parents believe that my children, our children, can have a better life than we had. That if they work hard, if they study, if they're kind, good human beings, that they actually have opportunity. And all of Gavin Newsom's policies do the opposite. They want to rip you down. They want to divide you. They want to turn you against the neighbors. And then they're just going to give you a $600 check in hopes to buy your vote. It's just got to stop, and it's got to stop here. That's one of the really big things we want to do on the show is we really want to arm people with information so that people say, okay, I left that show knowing a little bit more than I knew before I listened to the show. And I'm going to stand up and I'm going to do something. Because here's another problem we have in California. You can't assume somebody else is fixing the problem. I was a little nervous to do this podcast, to be honest, right? It's scary to speak up. It's scary to state your mind. It's scary to say we need to band together. It's easier to just do our work and to try to focus on our families. But they brought politics into our homes when they shut down the schools, when they hurt our communities, when they're getting rid of school choice, when they're letting, homelessness run rampant, drug all over the streets. And it really is going to take a citizen peaceful revolution to come together and say enough. Everybody needs to speak up. Everybody needs to start talking to their neighbors and saying, what do you think? I don't think you're a racist. I don't think you're a terrible person. We might disagree, but let's talk about it. And let's come together to fix our communities first and expand from there. And that's what we're really trying to do with this show. And so we'll see you next time on California Rebel Base.